April 1945. Schrobenhausen, Bavaria. The young German woman peered through a gap in the curtains, straining to see the approaching American tanks rumbling down the cobblestone street. 2 years of intensive propaganda had prepared Margarete Müller for this moment. The barbarians were at the gate. Reich newspapers and radio broadcasts had described in vivid detail what American soldiers would do to German women. The stories were specific, clinical in their descriptions of violations, designed to create both terror and resolve. Margarete had been instructed, along with 7 other young women from her street, to report to the town hall basement that morning. The local Bürgermeister explained they would serve as comfort women for the occupation forces, a necessary sacrifice to protect other German women. Across southern Germany that spring, Nazi officials established 211 similar facilities in towns facing imminent occupation. These locations, hastily converted from municipal buildings, schools, and in some cases private homes, were designated as controlled environments where occupying forces could direct their natural urges. According to recovered Wehrmacht documents, approximately 2,800 German women between ages 17 and 30 were formally conscripted into this final desperate program. Reich Directive 71/45, issued March 12, 1945, outlined the establishment of these facilities as necessary protection for the general female population. The directive's language revealed the regime's final psychological manipulation, convincing young women that American soldiers were barely controlled animals who would rampage through German towns, taking what they wanted by force. "The American soldier," stated one propaganda leaflet distributed in Bavaria, "has been promised the bodies of German women as reward for invasion." Another official publication claimed American units included specialized battalions drawn from prisons and mental institutions. What made this propaganda particularly effective was its foundation in German assumptions about their own military behavior. The Wehrmacht had established over 500 military brothels across occupied Europe between 1940 and 1944, forcing an estimated 34,000 women from conquered territories to serve German soldiers. Internal military communications, captured after the war, revealed that German leadership simply projected their own system onto their enemies. Margarete and thousands like her faced their impending duty with a mixture of terror and resignation. Many contemplated suicide. Records from Regensburg showed 27 confirmed cases of young women taking their lives in April 1945, rather than face what they believed was coming. Others prepared by securing poison, planning to end their lives after inevitable assaults became unbearable. What these women could not imagine, what Nazi propaganda had rendered impossible to conceive, was the reality that would unfold in the coming days. The American occupation would deliver not the expected horror, but something more destabilizing to Nazi ideology: dignity. The collision between propaganda and reality would create cognitive dissonance more powerful than any formal re-education program. That April evening, as Margarete packed a small bag with extra clothing, toiletries, and a hidden cyanide capsule provided by a sympathetic pharmacist, she could not know that the greatest shock awaiting her would not be American violence, but American restraint. The soldiers approaching her town carried not only weapons, but also a comprehensive set of non-fraternization regulations that would systematically dismantle the Reich's final deception. The last lie of the Third Reich was about to collapse under the weight of unexpected respect. December 1944. Fort Benning, Georgia. The American sergeant stood before rows of soldiers preparing for German occupation duty. In his hand, he held the official pocket guide to Germany, a 32-page booklet distributed to 1.6 million men destined for occupation service. "The German woman is not your prize," he stated firmly, tapping the guide section on civilian interactions. "Fraternization with the enemy population is strictly prohibited under General Eisenhower's Order 1. The men shifted uncomfortably as he continued. "Violation carries penalties including reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, and imprisonment up to 1 year. As Allied forces prepared for the final push into Germany, American military command implemented unprecedented preparation for occupation duties. General Eisenhower's Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force issued Directive JCS 1067 on September 22, 1944, explicitly prohibiting fraternization with German officials or the population. Unlike previous military occupations in American history, the German occupation included specific protections for female civilians from the outset, with comprehensive non-fraternization rules designed to maintain clear separation between occupiers and occupied. The training regimen for occupation forces included 12-hour modules specifically addressing civilian interaction protocols. Military police units received additional 36-hour specialized training in gender-sensitive operations. All command-level officers completed mandatory courses in occupation ethics at the military government school established at the University of Virginia, where instructors emphasized that America's moral standing depended on disciplined, respectful conduct. Pocket Guide GA7, Germany, Know Your Occupation Duties, contained explicit instructions. American soldiers must demonstrate that democracy treats women with respect, unlike the Nazi regime. Your conduct represents not just the military, but American values. The guide's specific prohibitions included entering private homes without authorization, requiring female civilians to perform personal services, and initiating non-essential conversation with German women. Each soldier received this guide, signed an acknowledgement of understanding, and faced routine inspection to ensure they carried it at all times. The occupation force's disciplinary structure reinforced these directives. Each company established a dedicated non-fraternization enforcement officer. Military police squads conducted regular patrols specifically monitoring soldier-civilian interactions. Court-martial records show that during pre-deployment training, command deliberately prosecuted fraternization violations at triple the normal rate to demonstrate seriousness, with 217 soldiers demoted or imprisoned between January and March 1945 for training violations alone. General Patton, addressing Third Army officers on February 7, 1945, underscored the strategic importance. How we treat German women will determine whether they see democracy as morally superior to Nazism. Your men will maintain professional distance or face my personal attention. This approach reflected not just military discipline, but psychological strategy, demonstrating through actions that Nazi propaganda about American barbarity was false. The segregated preparation of American forces carried particular significance. The 40,000 African American troops receiving occupation training faced additional scrutiny, with command emphasizing that their conduct would challenge both Nazi racial ideology and stereotypes at home. Their training included specific discussion of how proper treatment of German women would undermine multiple forms of prejudice simultaneously. As occupation forces crossed the Rhine in March 1945, they carried not only weapons and supplies, but a comprehensive behavioral framework fundamentally different from what awaited them in German towns. The women who had been designated as comfort girls by Nazi authorities would soon encounter these specially trained forces, men under strict orders that made social interaction, let alone exploitation, a serious offense. The collision between Nazi propaganda and American military discipline was about to produce unexpected consequences that would reshape German women's understanding of both their former government and their supposed enemies. April 15, 1945. Bad Tölz, Bavaria. The American lieutenant's boots echoed on the wooden floor as he conducted the housing requisition. Clipboard in hand, he walked through the Hoffmann family home, carefully documenting available space while maintaining a formal 3-meter distance from Frau Hoffmann and her 2 daughters. "This room will remain private," he marked on his form, designating the daughter's bedroom as off-limits. "American personnel will use separate entrance and facilities." His translator conveyed these instructions in stilted German, explaining that bathroom access would be scheduled with specific times reserved for family privacy. Across occupied Germany, initial encounters between American soldiers and German women followed similar patterns. Housing officers used standardized Form MG 105 to establish clear physical boundaries within requisitioned homes, maintaining separation between military personnel and female residents. Military government regulations required that in homes housing both Americans and German families, female sleeping areas must be physically separated by at least one room from American quarters, with locks provided for women's bedrooms. In Heidelberg, 19-year-old Greta Schultz recorded her confusion in a diary discovered by historians in 1978. They arrived, and I hid in the cellar, waiting for the screams from upstairs. Hours passed. Mother finally called me up. 2 Americans were sitting at our table, eating their own food. They nodded politely and left to sleep in Father's study. I keep waiting for something to happen, but they barely look at us. The American occupiers maintained rigid physical distance through formalized interactions. Military government records show that 93% of requisitioned homes received door signs marking private German quarters, off limits to military personnel for female-occupied rooms. Documentation procedures required that German women sign acknowledgement forms confirming that American personnel had maintained appropriate behavior, creating an accountability system that reinforced proper conduct. Language barriers reinforce this formal separation. With only 8% of American occupation forces speaking basic German, communication required official translators present at all civilian interactions. This procedural requirement transformed even simple conversations into formal exchanges, further preventing casual fraternization. The military government provided 26,000 English-German phrase cards with strictly professional content for necessary interactions. In Regensburg, where Nazi officials had established a comfort facility with 24 conscripted women, American counterintelligence officers sealed the building upon arrival, posting guards to prevent entry by either soldiers or German civilians. Military police records show that women designated as comfort personnel were initially detained for questioning, then released to their families or provided housing with elderly German couples, with their status officially documented as civilian refugees to protect their privacy. Helga Weber, a designated comfort girl in Augsburg, later testified to International Red Cross investigators, "We were gathered in the gymnasium, terrified, when American soldiers entered. But instead of what we expected, they brought female medical personnel who spoke to us privately, then arranged transport home. An American officer explained through a translator that we were free to go. I didn't understand. This contradicted everything we had been told would happen." Military police reports from the first month of occupation documented 57 violations of non-fraternization policies across the American zone, resulting in 41 courts-martial. These cases received front-page coverage in Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper, emphasizing command's zero-tolerance approach. Meanwhile, Soviet occupation forces in Eastern Germany operated under fundamentally different protocols, with contemporary estimates suggesting over 240,000 German women suffered sexual violence in comparable timeframes. As weeks passed, German women's initial terror gradually transformed into confusion, then cautious re-evaluation. The Reich's final propaganda campaign was collapsing, not through counter-propaganda, but through daily interactions that systematically contradicted everything they had been led to expect from American soldiers. May 1945, Heidelberg, Baden-Württemberg. The crisp white paper of JCS 1067 lay on the desk of Colonel Robert Murphy, who supervised its implementation across the American occupation zone. This document, he explained to newly arrived officers, defines our interaction with German civilians down to the meter of distance to maintain in conversation. These regulations covered every aspect of American-German civilian contact with mechanical precision. Housing arrangements, minimum separate facilities, food distribution, no direct handouts, centralized through German civil authorities, medical services, gender-matched personnel when possible, and personal interactions, prohibition of social conversation. The non-fraternization policy established a comprehensive system of graduated consequences for violations. First offences typically resulted in reduction of 1 rank and loss of 1 month's pay. Second violations brought formal court-martial with penalties ranging from 3 to 6 months of confinement. Third violations resulted in dishonourable discharge and potential imprisonment for up to 1 year. Military government records document 1,521 disciplinary actions for fraternization violations between April and December 1945, demonstrating consistent enforcement across the occupation zone. Physical locations throughout occupied territory were designated with specific interaction protocols. Military Government Order 6-27 established 3 categories of German establishments: white, permitted for American personnel; grey, permitted only for official business; and black, completely off limits. The black designation covered 78% of German residential areas, explicitly including any locations with unmarried German women. These restrictions were physically marked with standardized signage and enforced by military police patrols operating on 3-hour rotation schedules. The occupation authorities implemented strict curfew systems that further separated military personnel from German civilians. American troops observed a 2100 curfew in 67% of occupied towns, while German civilians faced a 1900 curfew, creating a 2-hour buffer when only military police were permitted on streets. This schedule ensured that American soldiers and German women were never in public spaces during evening hours when social interaction might be more likely to occur. Resource allocation proceeded through formal channels designed to minimize direct interaction. Food distribution followed a 3-tier system where American supplies were transferred to German civil authorities at municipal storehouses, then to neighborhood distribution centers, and finally to individual households, all without direct American civilian contact. Medical assistance operated through parallel facilities, with separate treatment centers for military personnel and German civilians. When specialized American medical expertise was required for civilian care, strict protocols required the presence of a German medical professional and a neutral observer. Documentation systems maintained formalized distance even during necessary interactions. Form MG 308, Civilian Interaction Record, required completion any time American personnel spent more than 5 minutes in conversation with German civilians. These forms documented the interaction's purpose, duration, and witnesses, creating comprehensive accountability. Military government archives contain 217,403 such forms from 1945 alone, demonstrating the bureaucratic thoroughness of the non-fraternization policy. As occupation established routine patterns, German women witnessed a system fundamentally different from what Nazi propaganda had prepared them for. In Nuremberg, Elsa Schmidt recorded in her journal, "The Americans have established a system where we barely see them. Food comes through our own officials. When they must enter homes for inspection, they send teams with a female translator. Their distant correctness is strange, not what we were told to expect." By August 1945, the occupation's structured formality had normalized into daily patterns. The Joint Chiefs of Staff modified Directive JCS 1067/6 to slightly relax non-fraternization policies, allowing conversation in public places while maintaining prohibitions against entering German homes for non-official purposes. This calibrated adjustment maintained essential protections while acknowledging the counterproductive aspects of complete separation. Across the occupation zone, the elaborate system of regulated interaction systematically dismantled the Reich's final propaganda narrative. German women who had been told to expect systematic violation instead encountered elaborate protective mechanisms. The psychological impact of this contrast between expectation and reality was creating profound reassessment, not just of American intentions, but of the credibility of the entire Nazi worldview they had previously accepted. October 1945. Stuttgart, American occupation zone. Margarete Weber sat across from her American employer at the military government office, translating documents with a concentration that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. "I spent the first weeks waiting for the mask to drop," she later wrote, in a letter preserved in the Baden-Württemberg State Archives. "Each day of respectful treatment made the next propaganda story crumble in my mind. By autumn, I found myself questioning not just what I'd been told about Americans, but everything the Reich had claimed. This cognitive dissonance between Nazi predictions and American reality triggered profound psychological reassessment among German women. Dr. Anna Merkel, a psychiatrist working with the military government, documented this transformation in her 1947 study of 214 women who had been designated as comfort personnel. Her clinical interviews revealed a pattern: initial terror, followed by confusion when expected violations never materialized, then systematic questioning of other Nazi ideological claims. The collapse of this specific propaganda point created a cascade effect, Dr. Merkel noted. Women reported questioning racial theories, leadership principles, and other core beliefs once this central expectation proved false. Trust developed through predictable patterns of respectful interaction. Military government records tracked civilian attitude shifts through monthly surveys, showing that female approval of American occupation forces increased from 14% in May 1945 to 72% by December. This transformation occurred most rapidly among women who had direct professional contact with Americans through clerical, translation, or administrative positions. The 37,500 German women employed by occupation authorities by late 1945 became informal ambassadors within their communities, counteracting lingering propaganda effects through first-hand testimonials. Cultural exchange accelerated this transformation. While formal non-fraternization policies remained in effect, they evolved to permit professional interaction and supervised cultural programs. By November 1945, the Information Control Division had established 87 America houses across the occupation zone, offering German women their first unfiltered access to American literature, music, and democratic political thought. Attendance records show that women constituted 64% of visitors to these facilities in their first year of operation. Military government survey data revealed that exposure to American democratic practices significantly influenced German women's political views. Among women who had regular professional contact with Americans, support for democratic governance reached 81% by spring 1946, compared to 43% among women without such contact. Women who had been designated as comfort personnel showed particularly dramatic transformation, with 93% expressing support for democratic systems in post-occupation interviews, suggesting that the contrast between expectation and reality created especially powerful reassessment. As occupation progressed, non-fraternization policies gradually relaxed. In July 1945, social conversation in public places became permitted. In October, Americans were allowed to speak with German children. By December, limited social interaction with adults was authorized in public venues. Military government records show that as these restrictions eased, reported violations actually decreased, suggesting that the initial rigid structure had established behavioral norms that persisted even as formal constraints diminished. Despite prohibition, romantic relationships inevitably developed. Between 1945 and 1949, approximately 14,175 German women married American personnel, with the first such union officially recorded in August 1946 after policy changes permitted fraternization. These marriages required extensive background screening and commanding officer approval, creating a 6-month average waiting period. The children born from American-German relationships, estimated at 94,000 between 1945 and 1955, represented visible evidence of transformed relations. Diaries and letters from this period document women's evolving attitudes. Helga Brandt, who had hidden in her cellar for 3 days when Americans arrived in Munich, wrote to her sister in October 1945. "Last week, I attended a chamber music concert organized by the Americans. I realized halfway through that I was sitting unaccompanied in a room full of foreign soldiers, feeling completely safe. This simple moment made me understand how thoroughly we were deceived. Not just about these men, but about everything." By 1947, the transformation was largely complete. Women who had been specifically prepared to fear American soldiers had instead received a practical education in democratic values through daily interaction. This lived experience proved more persuasive than any formal re-education program, changing not just attitudes toward Americans, but fundamental beliefs about individual dignity, gender relations, and political rights. July 1955. Schrobenhausen, Bavaria. Margarete Müller, now Margarete Wilson, pushed her daughter's stroller through the same town square where a decade earlier she had awaited American troops with terror. The transformation in her life paralleled broader patterns across West Germany, where women's experiences during American occupation had created lasting impacts on political attitudes and gender relations. Longitudinal studies by the Institute for Demoscopy Allensbach tracked this evolution, finding that women who had direct contact with American forces during 1945 to 1949 showed 37% higher rates of democratic participation than demographically matched counterparts without such interaction. The psychological impact extended far beyond the occupation period. Dr. Elizabeth Koenig's landmark 1960 study, Expectation and Reality, German Women's Political Development, documented that former comfort girls showed the most dramatic long-term transformation. Among 173 women interviewed who had been designated for this role, 89% became actively involved in democratic politics, compared to 23% of the general female population. Their direct experience with the contrast between Nazi propaganda and American conduct created cognitive dissonance that permanently altered their worldview. As one subject explained, "Once I discovered they had lied about this fundamental threat, I questioned everything else I had been taught." This transformation transferred across generations. The daughters of women who experienced American occupation demonstrated measurably different attitudes than peers. University of Munich research in the 1970s found that these daughters were 42% more likely to pursue higher education, 56% more likely to support gender equality initiatives, and showed significantly higher rates of democratic participation. The lived experience of their mothers created intergenerational transmission of democratic values more effectively than formal education programs. The impact appeared in cultural expression across post-war decades. German literature, film, and art reflected this transformed understanding. Louise Rintzer's 1953 novel Die ersten Tage, The First Days, portrayed the psychological journey of a woman designated as a comfort girl who discovers unexpected dignity in American occupation. The 1959 film Die Brücke der Hoffnung, Bridge of Hope, depicted similar themes, becoming one of post-war Germany's first major international successes. These cultural artifacts documented a societal reassessment that began with individual women's experiences. Academic research continued documenting this phenomenon. Professor Maria Hearn's comprehensive 2001 study, GIs and Fräuleins, analyzed over 12,000 personal accounts, military records, and survey data to quantify the occupation's impact on women's political development. Her research concluded that the contradiction between Nazi predictions and American conduct regarding German women became a central catalyst for democratization, particularly for those who had been most thoroughly indoctrinated by the regime's final propaganda efforts. Statistical comparison revealed the scale of contrast between expectation and reality. In the American occupation zone between 1945 and 1949, reported sexual assaults numbered 1,336 cases, with 95% prosecution rate. Women employed by occupation authorities reached 128,400. German-American marriages totaled 14,175. Democratic political participation by women increased from 21% to 67%. Meanwhile, in the Soviet occupation zone during the same period, estimated sexual assaults exceeded 240,000. Women in administrative positions numbered only 18,700. Soviet German marriages remained prohibited. Authorized political participation stayed strictly controlled. The modern legacy appears in contemporary German-American relations, with polling consistently showing stronger support for transatlantic partnership among women whose mothers experienced American occupation. The 2018 Transatlantic Trends Survey found that 76% of respondents from this demographic supported NATO and broader American alliance compared to 54% of the general population. Margarete herself exemplified this transformation. The young woman who had hidden a cyanide capsule in April 1945 became a community liaison for the Marshall Plan in 1948, married an American administrator in 1950, and eventually served on Schrobenhausen's city council after returning from America. Her journey from terror to civic leadership traced the path that thousands of German women followed, their experiences with unexpected American respect becoming foundational to post-war democracy. The story of German comfort girls and American soldiers reveals history's counterintuitive mechanisms of change. The women prepared for violation instead received respect, creating cognitive transformation more powerful than formal re-education. Their experience demonstrates that genuine respect for human dignity proves more effective than force or propaganda in changing hearts and minds. The American occupiers who simply treated German women with ordinary respect unknowingly planted seeds of democratic transformation that would flourish across generations, helping establish Europe's most stable democracy from the ruins of its most terrible dictatorship.